Alright, so welcome to the second part of the video. In this section, we'll be actually texturing the object. So let's begin. So first, let's go into viewport shading so we could actually see how the object looks like with the textures. And then let's go into material properties. Alright, so now that we're in material properties, we gotta actually add materials to our object. And the way you do this is by pressing a new material and then naming this. So for now, we'll name this bottle. But if you notice, when we interact with the colors, it affects the whole bottle. And for example, we want just the top to be affected separate from the bottom. What we have to do is press this plus sign right here, and you add a new material, and let's name it bottle top, for example. So now, as you can see, if I change anything, it doesn't really affect the bottle because we haven't assigned anything to it yet. And the way we do that is by going into edit mode and then wireframe mode and then selecting the areas you want to be affected by this material and pressing assign. And now if you could see, when we change the colors, it changes just the top area instead of both of these areas like this. And then all we have to do is just assign the same material as the top one, and the way we do that is by pressing this down arrow right here and then bottle top. Alright, so now that we have that done, as you can see right here, if we change this to black, it changes both of these materials together. So it's perfect because that's what we want. One thing that you can notice is that there's white areas in here, and that's because we haven't applied our boolean yet. So what I would do is apply the subdivision and then the boolean. But for example, we have a bunch of, let's just say for example, we have a bunch of modifiers and we don't want to go individually and apply each one. You can just go into object, convert, and then to mesh. And as you can see, the modifiers disappear because it applies them automatically. So now all we have to do is just assign these faces as well. And you can see that the top part has turned into black. Alright, so now that the top part works, actually let me just make this bottom part black as well, just because I noticed that that's what it's like in actual object. Anyway, so now we have the top part done, kind of, not yet, but we're getting there. And then, so for white, or for the bottom part, we decided that we're going to make it transparent, right? But from just the base colors, you can't really make it transparent. So what we have to do is go into the shading group right here. And this is where you get a better look at actually interacting with the materials. And so for example, the bottle, you could change it from here. Then you can add additional things to this. Alright, so the important thing with shader nodes is that it gives us more ability to actually modify our object and the material. So for example, the way you add nodes is by doing Shift A, and then you could either search for an object or a node, or you could just go based on the different windows. So for example, texture, let's add a wave texture right here. And if we add it to the base, as you can see, it adds lines to this, and then you could actually mess around with the distortion, make it look like a wave and things of that sort. And this is very useful because it allows you to add roughness, maps, and just make it look realistic. So for example, for our bottle, so the way we make this transparent is by increasing the transmission and decreasing the roughness. And right now it might look like it looks weird right now, but once you go into actual render view, you could see that it's transparent. But then, like I mentioned before, the advantage of using the shader viewpoint is that you can add texture to this. So for example, the way I do this is by previewing. So you just put the actual thing into the base, or sorry, the color into the base, and you can see how this would react with the actual object. So for example, where's the Musgrave? Right here. If you add this to the base, you can see how it kind of adds texture to this, sort of kind of like roughness. And if you put this in the actual roughness section right here, it makes it so that certain parts are transparent while others aren't. And this is a good way to kind of solve the object being used. See that there's kind of imperfections going on, issues with UV of your object. So the way you change that is by going to the UV editor and selecting all the vertices of the object, and then pressing U, and then doing Smart UV Project, like this. And basically what it does is it cuts the object into pieces, so then you could add better detail to your object. So like this, and then you do control changes to UV, so the texture reacts with the object changes based on our UV. Alright, so now that we want to make these stripes, there's a couple of ways of doing this, but the easiest and the most useful way of doing it is to actually texture paint it. And the way you do that is by going to the texture paint window. The reason you have to go here is just because everything's set up for you already. You could obviously do this outside of texture paint, but it's just simpler this way. Alright, so now to actually add the texture paint, what you have to do is add click the plus button and then select base color, and then pick your width and height of your pixels. So the more complicated your object is, the higher up you want this to be. And then this is very important, make sure for the color section it's set to all the way black, and this will allow us to actually interact and add the textures later on. So now that we've added this, you can see that the bottom of the bottle has turned black, and that's because our bottle base color has directly been imported into our base color. And so right here, if we were to draw over this, it would directly interact with the object. So this is good in cases where we want to, here, let me revert this. So this is good in cases we want it to be, you know, hand drawn, something that's like, you know, like a M or something like that. But in our case, what we have to do is actually add a texture to this. So the way you do that is by going to the texture tab right here and then pressing new. But as you can see, there's nothing in here. So what you have to do is go into the texture properties right here, press open, and then from here, you would have to go into the file where the object where you want this to be imported from is. So right now I have something similar downloaded like so. What you have to do is first go into mapping, and instead of repeat, you do clip. And in our case, you can't really see anything, but in case it's stretched or not sized properly, what you have to do is change the maximum X and Y, and this will kind of stretch out your object and just make it more the way you want it to be. Afterwards, we have to go into Active 2. So instead of tiled, you would have to go into stencil. So now that we have all our settings done, we could actually start painting the object. So the way you do that is by, you know, selecting an area you want this to be painted at. You could select the angle by pressing Control and then right clicking. You could also shift and then make this bigger or smaller. And in our case, this is about the size we want this to be at. So for us, it should be good. So let's actually start painting. So right click select to actually move this around, and then all we're going to do is just simply start drawing in the areas we want this to be drawn over like this. And you can see that this actually leaves an imprint on our object. So you would just have to do this over and over again like this, and make sure that it's in the same height approximately, just because you don't really want this to, you know, not match like this. Anyways, you get the point. So you just do this over and over again, and as you can see here, it actually paints on top of this object. So in our case, you can see there's jagged lines here. It would just mean that you have to, you know, get a better picture, and when you actually import and make the texture paint, you just make these pixels higher. That's all that means. Anyway, so we got this part done. It's the same idea behind this as well. Now let's actually, you know, add some textures to this to make it look like it is a water bottle. So some things that might sell this better is imperfections. So as we all know, in the real world, there's, you know, on your phone case, there's scratches or there's fingerprints. So same thing would be happening to a water bottle. It wouldn't just be straight metallic, I guess, in the case where you just buy it. But otherwise, what you would do is add a texture, and you could do different variations. So for example, right here, sorry, this is gradient. So the best one to, you know, sell the idea of something being imperfect is usually Musgrave, and it's a good combination with our add-on, which is Control T. And then you could increase the size slightly like this, and then instead of having it in a base color, you could either have it in a roughness like this, which doesn't look great in our case. You could also you know, scale it down or scale it up, but it doesn't really work for us right here. Another good one is noise, as you can see right here. This is usually one of the better ones when it comes to adding roughness. So you can see right here, it's less subtle. You know, when you look at it, you can't really tell exactly, but if you pay attention to it more, you can actually notice, you know, that there is some imperfections in our object, and this is a very good way to, you know, add realism to your objects. And then you could add this, you could add the add-on to this, you know, switch the locations, find a position that works better for you, or maybe rotate this, things of that sort. Maybe add the scale so it's some sort of a texture kind of thing. And yeah, you generally get an idea of what it's supposed to look like, and then just make sure you add this color back so you could actually, you know, see the striped lines. In our case, it's not fully done, but this is just for example. So if you were to do this on an actual model, you would obviously have to spend more time and try to make sure that this matches and actually looks nice. Otherwise, let's just worry about the top part now. So we can see that there is some shininess to this, so that just means that we gotta add some roughness like this, or decrease the roughness like this. And then there's several things we could do, but the easiest is to literally just copy what we have for here and then add it to this. So it would literally just be a noise with our mapping, and then it goes into our roughness like this. So as you can see here, there's some areas that are rough enough for us to work with, and then there's some areas that are completely too rough, so there's no reflection. So a good way to actually work around this is by adding a color ramp like so, and you could decide how dark you want the certain areas to be. So the darker it is, the more reflective it is. So in our case, this is super white, so if we turn this down slightly, you can see that it's becoming more shiny. So in this case, and then the closer you bring these to each other, the more noticeable the difference between the two things are. So in our case, you know, it's giving good enough roughness, so this should work for our case. And then obviously if you want to paint something on this, like a water droplet, something of that sort, you can use the same method as we used previously. But this is about all for this lesson, and so I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you've learned enough to start making actual renders of your own, since now you have information on how to use textures properly. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.